Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news for the Miami Hurricane fans coming from the transfer portal late Friday night as former NC State defensive lineman CJ Clark committing to the Miami Hurricanes. And this is a guy that is not necessarily going to jump out of the stat sheet. And you're going to read his numbers and say, oh, this guy's a difference maker in terms of stats. But when you turn on the film, the value that he brings to the defense in terms of taking on double teams and being physical at the point of attack, that's the value you're getting with CJ Clark. And many of the Miami Hurricane fans in the comment section have been kind of calling for this. Like, we need that big physical body in the middle of this defense to kind of hold that middle. And Leonard Taylor, with him going to the NFL draft, this is the ideal fit for this Miami Hurricanes defensive line, where you have CJ Clark, that guy who's just going to take on double teams and free up guys like Ruben Bain and Justin Scott and potentially a guy like Armando Blunt to go make those plays. Massive addition to this Miami team, something that we said they needed to make, and they get one of the best guys at doing it in CJ Clark. Going to dive into CJ Clark, talk a little bit about what he's bringing to the table. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a special shout out to the Miami Hurricane fans. This has been a program that it's heating up on the recruiting trail. We'll talk about a few of the flip commitments potentially later on. But you guys consistently just show a ton of support to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, going to kick this one off to you. CJ Clark making his way down to South Florida. How are we feeling?
In a big get, given kind of where the defensive line's at, because you're right, you have your playmakers already. You have Ruben Bain, you have Harrison Hunt, who like guys who have shown to make plays and be a little bit more, a bit more of those stat stuffers from the defensive line. You have a couple young guys with Justin Scott coming in and obviously potentially Blunt, like playmakers, big time, possible first round pick type talents. But you did need somebody or maybe even a couple guys to come in and be those meat and potatoes, play in the middle and be able to play physical against teams that want to run at you. And that's exactly what he does. Again, what you mentioned, not really a tackling machine by any stretch of the imagination, but he'll sit on double teams and allow everyone else to kind of eat.
And allow everyone else to feast. And that's, you look at that NC State team, they were very good at getting behind the backfield. Peyton Wilson, I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the best linebackers in the country was playing behind a guy like CJ Clark. Because when you're a linebacker and you got a guy like CJ Clark right in front of you, you're playing clean. He's eating the double team. So that kind of tells you what he brings. You take a look at the numbers. I mean, he's played over 1,400 snaps in his career at the Power 5 level, going to be a 6-year senior. The number that I love the most, it's not the 7.5 TFLs, it's not the 4 sacks, it's the average depth of tackle of 1.3 yards down the field. What does that tell you? He's winning at the point of attack. He's making his plays at or behind the line of scrimmage, and that is something that it kind of tells you a little bit about how he plays and how he kind of reestablishes that defensive line. And in a Miami defense that is just extremely talented in the front seven, adding a guy like CJ Clark is going to mean massive things for this Miami Hurricanes defense. And Dill, I'll tell you this much. I don't think the Miami Hurricanes are quite done recruiting on that inside of that defensive line, because there's another guy coming from Middle Tennessee and Marley Cook, who we might be seeing a commitment in the next couple of days from him. Obviously, Jason Taylor making some moves with Marley Cook, a guy that's a little bit smaller, but it gives you a little bit more juice in terms of a pass rusher on the inside as well. But more importantly, just continuing to build that depth.
And that's something you kind of talk about, and I think you take for granted when you like see your first round picks, but you kind of have first round defensive linemen when you can keep them fresh and keep them off the field to some extent, and when you can go 2 to 3 deep on your defensive, especially in that interior when guys are big. It's a very, very hard position. When you got a pass rush, that takes a lot out of you. So to be able to play again, add a couple more pieces, especially given what they might lose, it's going to be a huge thing for me, at least when I'm looking at what Miami does in this portal. If they can add one, maybe 2 more guys up the middle to complement what Clark and the rest of these guys are going to do, I think that's huge, because you probably want at least 2 full lines, if not 3.
And it's becoming so evident of like where Mario Cristobal is prioritizing his recruiting efforts and his personnel, like on the offense and defensive line. Like, this team, in the culture that Mario Cristobal wants to get from the Hurricanes, is tough and physical along both lines of scrimmages. You could tell about who they went after on the recruiting trail, right? Going out and getting Justin Scott, pushing hard for Armando Blunt. That is what they value with Mario Cristobal in town. And you said it best. Like, one of the more underrated conversations that people don't have is the depth on that defensive line. You look at what makes Michigan and Georgia so special is they are rotating so many capable bodies. And I emphasize the word capable in and out. And you look at the Florida Gators 2 years ago when they had Gervin Dexter, first round NFL talent. They didn't get the best out of him because he had to play so much football because they had no depth behind him. And so you look at other guys like Ruben Bain and Justin Scott and Armando Blunt, what he's going to allow you to do is kind of like let's keep those guys fresh. And again, they're all true freshmen. They're still learning the ropes. Like, you get a guy like CJ Clark coming in and Marley Cook, like that's going to mean massive things for these youngsters to come in and develop behind veteran seasoned vets.
Yeah, and frankly, it allows those guys to shine and kind of continue the build that Mario Cristobal is trying to make. Because I think the big thing is you're starting to see both fronts play really, really well.
Yes.
And if you can play really good football, you can attract really good high school football players. And I think you're starting to see the seeds of that. Like, again, Justin Scott he commits to Ohio State. The Ohio State's had solid defenses for the past couple of years now, but he's looking at Miami now. And that's not he doesn't need to like hope for that vision. He gets to see a little bit of it. You get to see a guy like Leonard Taylor dominate, and you get to see a guy like Ruben Bain dominate. And frankly, you got to see the offensive line play really, really good football. So I think he's starting to, again, not only just recruit it, but the on the field results are kind of coming along with how you need them to be. And that should just feed the machine even more. And that's what, again, if you're a Hurricane fan, you really haven't seen a team try to build up front and kind of inside out like you have.
In my mind, if there's like one thing to be super optimistic about Mario Cristobal and his future at Miami, I get there were some things that went on this season that made you frustrated. 100% understand that. But there were a lot of things that you're really excited about. And I think the number one thing is how physical this team is at the point of attack. Like, that is not what we're used to saying in the last 10 years for this Miami Hurricanes program.
I mean, beating up a really tough Clemson team, like just getting the best of them all. Like, that's the type of thing you just need to see more of, and that's what kind of what's got me. Like, again, you're right about some of the frustrating things you saw, and with the turnovers and some issues there. But like, man, you didn't miss a beat at any point. They dominated every game up front. That's where it starts and stops.
That's what you're most excited about. Now, the last guy for Hurricane fans, and there's plenty we'll talk about this weekend on the recruiting trail, the high school recruiting trail, but sticking with the transfer portal, a guy that we know very well coming from Michigan to Indiana, now potentially to South Florida, Zach Carpenter. And again, one of those guys that you're losing Matt Lee. We all know how much Matt Lee meant to that offense. Like, he was kind of the heartbeat, and it's so important to have an experienced, solid, reliable center. Matt Lee off to the NFL, one of my favorite Hurricanes from last year. Wish him the best. Not a better guy to replace him than Zach Carpenter. 445 pass blocking snaps last year as a 2-year starter at Indiana. He only gave up 8 pressures last year on 450 pass pro sets. This is a guy that's proven at the Big Ten level, had some really good film against some really good defensive linemen in the Big Ten. Potential, well, it is taking a visit to Florida, or to Miami, Florida this weekend. This would be another massive, massive get for the Canes here.
Yeah, and just another thing you talk about, building competitive depth through your football team, because you're right. They have, again, a young crop of guys from that 23 class who are definitely around, but you want to get the best out of them by bringing in guys like Zach Carpenter and making everybody,
especially at the center position. Like, that's where, like, you're losing Matt Lee, who was that experienced guy that knew all the pass pros and was like just very reliable up front, and you're able to potentially cycle in another center that's seen a ton of football, played a ton of football at the Big Ten level, where you're seeing elite defensive linemen.
And if a young kid's going to beat him, he's going to need to beat him. It's not going to be like an unearned spot. And you've seen some positions in across this country where you got guys who are sitting there who really didn't need to earn it, and they just don't play as sharp as those teams that have, again, a very competitive room. And Zach Carpenter is a guy who, if he doesn't start, at least and you add a guy like him, at least you're adding a guy who is going to make a room much more competitive.
Competitive depth. That's how you build programs. Zach Carpenter certainly would add to that. We'll stop it there. I have a feeling for Miami Hurricane fans, we're going to be talking a little bit more on the recruiting trail this weekend from the high school level. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.